Apple TV Plus just released the first 2 episodes of his new limited series, Presumed Innocent, which is a new legal murder mystery drama created by the great David E. Kelley and based on the 1987 novel of the same name, as well as a feature film that was released in 1990 starring Harrison Ford. In today's video, I'll be recapping and breaking down this first episode titled Bases Loaded, followed by a breakdown of episode 2, as we'll try to figure out who killed Carolyn Polimis. We open this episode with a court trial as we meet Rusty Savage, a prosecutor giving his opening remarks in an unknown trial as he tells the jury that he will be providing
evidence to show you that the accused committed this crime. And should you find that to be likely, you gotta vote not guilty.
As he finishes his opening remarks to the jury with a line that may come back into play later in this episode.
I will live up to my duty. I ask that you rise up to yours. Let's do our jobs, shall we?
Now, within these opening scenes, I don't think it's a coincidence that we're first introduced to Rusty's work life, and then that's followed by introducing his family. I think it's very purposeful for us to understand as an audience where his priorities lie first. Now, as far as his home life goes, it seems like he has a pretty good, happy life at home, but this is interrupted by a call that he gets by Raymond, as you can see the mood completely changes as he finds out what this call is all about. As we watch Rusty call his wife aside to tell her that Carolyn has been murdered, and you can hear that unsettledness in his voice and also the fear as well. This to me is a very important scene because this is the last time Rusty had some sense of normalcy before his life is about to be turned upside down. As Rusty arrives on the scene, he's told by Raymond, who called him in the scene before, that he shouldn't go inside because it's bad, but we watch Rusty ignores him as he heads into the murder scene. Now at the scene, we see just how bad the situation is as we see Carolyn's body was found with her hands and feet tied together. Now immediately seeing someone found like this, and based on the premise on the show, which the show wants you to believe that Rusty is the prime suspect, you would think to yourself, why would he leave the body like that? If he were to kill her, you would think him being a prosecutor, he would be more meticulous. So to me, this points to the position that this was premeditated, but also the person that did kill her wanted her to suffer slowly. As we watch the rest of the staff reacting to the news of what happened to Carolyn, we're introduced to 2 new characters by the name of Nico and Tommy. Now within this scene, we learn that Tommy wants to take the lead in this case, but we also find out that Raymond is currently the district attorney and he wants Rusty to take on the lead because, as he says, he's the best lawyer available. As we watch Rusty get into preparation for this case, he's having a conversation with the detective who we'll talk about later in this episode, as he tells her that he wants the lab tests and the forensics to go to him specifically and only him, something to remember later for this breakdown. Now something else I noticed and I want to talk about more in detail later, we see the news reporting on Carolyn's death, and something they talk about is who she was as a person, but they also have a little detail in this description as they say that she has her own political aspirations. Now something that was also important that wasn't mentioned later in this episode was there was a housekeeper that found her body. I wonder where this housekeeper is and if she saw anything besides finding her body. As we watch, Barbara holds her husband Rusty, who's clearly shaken up by the news, but what I love about these opening scenes so far is Jake Gyllenhaal does a great job of not only looking desperate and sad, but also seems like he's holding his own secrets. Now I found this to be a very interesting line of dialogue as Barbara tells Rusty that she will support her husband through this, but she will not be attending the funeral. Now later on in this episode, we find out that Barbara was aware of the affair, but again, this is another example of the reactions of these characters so far being looked at in 2 different ways. Obviously, one would say that why would the wife want to attend the funeral of a woman who slept with her husband, but then also you can look at it as maybe she doesn't want to attend because she might know something, or maybe she was involved in the murder herself. Now at this memorial, we see that Carolyn's ex is in attendance, as we see Raymond describes him as being weird, but more importantly in this moment, Rusty learns that she actually had a son. Now after the memorial, we see Rusty shares a lead with Raymond and he believes that Carolyn's case might be connected to Bunny Davis. Now Russ makes the connection of this case because Bunny was found in a very similar manner as Carolyn, as they were both tied up. Back home, we see Rusty throwing a baseball at the garage as his son Kyle asks him about his whereabouts. As Rusty tells him that he just got done attending Carolyn's memorial, was it me or did it seem like his son was upset after he mentioned her name? Does his son Kyle know of this relationship that he had with Carolyn? Did he ever catch them in the act? Something I really enjoyed about this first episode was how they used the flashbacks of showing Rusty and Carolyn together. Now in this moment here, we watch him looking over the pictures, and to me this can be again looked at 2 different perspectives. One is him looking at these photos, looking for clues, looking for mistakes from the killer, but then there's the other side where you see this look of concern and frustration of what happened to her, but you can also look at it as maybe he's looking at these photos to see if if he made any mistakes. Now, right now, the cause of death is blunt force trauma to the head, as Rusty gets into a bit of an uncomfortable conversation with the medical doctor, and we hear that there were no stab wounds or signs of sexual assault. Now, taking a look at this flashback scene with the Bunny Davis case, we see Carolyn speaking to the jury describing what happened to Bunny Davis at the hands of Liam Reynolds, as we see the photos of Davis, and it is exactly the same way that Carolyn's body was found. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but we get this scene here where we see Tommy watching that case involving Bunny Davis, and he's also talking to Nico on the phone about Rusty's angle about the possible connection. But I don't remember Rusty telling anyone besides Raymond about the similarities in the cases. Now, of course, you can say, well, they all work together, and I'm sure they're sharing notes or trying to figure out what happened to their colleague, but at the same time, something's telling me that Tommy may be spying on Rusty to get information on him like this without his knowledge. Now, we see Rusty and Detective Rodriguez are paying Reynolds a visit who's in prison, but we also learn that Carolyn was hit in the head with a fire joker that was missing from the scene. Now, obviously, that's probably our murder weapon, but more importantly, it's probably in the possession of the killer. As Detective Rodriguez says to Rusty that she was tied up very meticulously, but the murder seemed to be spontaneous. Now, in this somewhat interrogation scene, we see that Reynolds has no remorse over Carolyn's death. Now, a little detail that they made very clear for us to see as an audience, Reynolds seems to have a thing about biting his nails. It seems to be very important to his character. Now, obviously, actors have their little things that they want to add to a character, but I think that we should keep an eye out for those nails because I think those nails might be found at one of the murder scenes. But again, going back to how Reynolds despised Carolyn, we see him say to Detective Rodriguez and Rusty,
"Statement for you. Yippee." Or no, here's a better one. Here's a better one. From me. What goes around comes around. Gladly crater her skull.
Now, we see Rusty tries to entice him by saying that the fact that he might be interested in this case because of the fact that Carolyn's murderer used the same methods that he used on Bunny Davis. But as of right now, Reynolds could care less and is happy to find out that she's dead because she ruined his life, as we get this flashback of his sentencing as he attacked Rusty, but more importantly, he felt that this was a mistrial. We watch Rusty trying to figure out the case more as he pays a visit to Mr. Caldwell's house, who is Carolyn's ex-husband. Now, in this moment, we learn that they divorced more than 9 years ago and they haven't really been in touch. Now, this episode never identifies how long Carolyn and Rusty worked together, but it seems to me that the husband was not aware of their affair at all. Now, in this moment, we know that he's not a suspect because he has an alibi, but more importantly in this scene, we see that his son is present and he's very angry about the situation, and also his dad mentions that the fact that their family was broken up. Now, this whole family dynamic is very interesting to me because there's so many missing details so far. Like, did the kid know about Rusty and his mom? Did he maybe blame Rusty for having his family being broken up, or did he blame his mom on just leaving the family? There's so much to unravel about the mystery of Carolyn's secret son, but also this particular relationship between her and her ex-husband. Yet another example of Rusty being looked at as guilty or innocent. We see him getting what appears to be the forensics, and he seems to be upset by what was reported, and he immediately hides them in his personal bag. Did that report maybe say that Carolyn was pregnant? We watch Rusty gives the rest of the staff the information he's gathered so far, and we see that Tommy isn't happy with the news. He feels as though that Rusty hasn't done much of anything and that this case isn't going anywhere, as Rusty pulls him aside and they have a little bit of a verbal altercation, and Tommy just looks at the situation as Rusty being too close to the case. I'm really enjoying this dynamic between these two characters, and there's obviously some bad blood between them that happened in the past that I'm really excited to explore more. And personally, I think these scenes between these two characters are so interesting because in real life, Jake Gyllenhaal and Peter are actually brother-in-laws. Back at the Savage's house, we see that Barbara learns that Rusty is taking the lead on this case. Now, Rusty explains to her his reasons why, which number one is they need to win this case because it looks nice for Raymond's re-election, but if they lose, that means that Nico wins and that also Tommy will replace him as the position of the lead prosecutor. Now, one of the more bigger moments of this episode is that Barbara actually knew about the affair that her husband had with Carolyn. Now, in this moment, we find out that their marriage barely survived this affair, which makes me wonder how long was this affair going on and how did she actually find out? Now, Barbara tells him one of the reasons why she's afraid of him taking this case is what if the media finds out, but also she's afraid that her husband is going to disappear in this case, and that it will break her. I'm really enjoying the family drama angle so far because it makes the stakes feel so much higher. Now, adding a little bit more context to this affair, but also Rusty's position on this affair, we see him having a conversation with his therapist about cheating and how it runs in his family. Now, Rusty and Barbara met when they were very young. I believe he said that they were 20 when they first met, and then 6 months later they had their first kid and their second one shortly after, which to me means that he's just basically saying that his life just kind of came at him. It wasn't really planned, and maybe that this relationship that he had with Carolyn was almost like an escape from his everyday life. As Rusty and his therapist continue to talk about the reasons why he believed that Carolyn was maybe drawn to him, we see the therapist says that maybe it was because of power. As we get these cutscenes of Carolyn mentioning Barbara while they were having their physical moments, and that kind of being a turn on for her. As we see them just being very physical, they're choking each other, they're biting each other and being very physical. But a very important thing to me was this line that we see Rusty says,
I can't stop thinking about her.
So was Rusty obsessed with her? This makes me wonder so much about the dynamic, and also going back to the kinkiness and their kind of physicality whenever they were around each other. Was this whole tying her up a turn on for both of them? Was it maybe a role-playing game that they had to bring up maybe old case files like the Bunny Davis, tie me up like her? Were they both just like sick and had these weird kinks with one another? As the episode wraps up, we see Nico does win the election and beats Raymond, but the question is what's going to happen with Rusty in this case, but also what's going to happen with his job? Which is safe to assume that Tommy's now going to be the lead as the chief prosecutor, and this case will be up for grabs. Now, after Rusty and his family watch Nico win the election, we get a really important scene between husband and wife. Now, Barbara tells Rusty that she loves him and she stayed in this relationship even after the affair because of their family, but a key line she says is she will fight for him and this family. But she also tells him that Rusty needs to stop loving her. I think that we need to key in on this scene, remember that line about the importance of the family, how she would fight for this family, but also she needed him to stop loving her. As we wrap up this premiere episode, it's the next morning with the new bosses in their seat, and they make the switch over to Tommy being the new lead chief prosecutor, as we see Russ is now handing over the cases. As it pertains to Carolyn case, things get a little bit heated. Now, Tommy brings up the fact that there were missing paperwork within his file, but also the paperwork that was missing involved Rusty's fingerprints being at the murder scene. Now, Rusty tries to bring up the fact that they would work together late at cases that would explain why his fingerprints was around the house. Now, Tommy pushes the conversation and brings up the fact that there were multiple calls and text messages between the two, but then he asks the most important question, which is,
were you and Caroline romantically involved?
Now, Russ tells him that their personal relationship has nothing to do with this case, which clearly pisses off Raymond because he had no idea that they were having an affair. As our final moments reveal that Carolyn was pregnant, and Tommy asks Rusty if he's the father. Now let's go back to the title of this premiere episode, which was Bases Loaded, and let me load these bases with who I assume to be the main suspects. So right now, in no particular order, I'm going to load the bases with Rusty. We have Carolyn's ex-husband, Mr. Caldwell. We have Liam Reynolds, who might have an accomplice who killed Carolyn. I'm going to also put Barbara and her children on this list as well. And last but not least, I'm going to put Nico and Tommy on the list as well. So starting with Rusty, the obvious things are he had a relationship with her, things went south, she got pregnant, she was going to maybe tell Barbara, it was going to ruin his career, so he would kill her to stop this from happening. But again, I go back to Rusty not being the murderer. Why would he leave her body the way it was found? Why would he be so sloppy in this? So again, I'm leaning towards Rusty not being the killer, but again, he's on the main suspect list. Now going over to the ex-husband, again, we can play that same game. Ex-husband, jealousy, found out about the affair, found out about something else, found out that maybe he's not the actual father of their son. He might have his reasons, but again, he has an alibi, at least from the police perspective so far. Speaking of alibis, we know that Reynolds was in prison, which would make it impossible for him to be at the murder scene when she died. But this idea of him having an accomplice or someone that's being like a mocking killer of him could be in the realm of possibility. Now, as far as the wife goes, kind of the same thing. Maybe she found out that they were having an affair again. She found out that maybe she was pregnant and she took matters in her own hand. And again, we have to remember, we're still looking for a murder weapon, which is that fire poker. Now, the children can be a bit of a switch, but I'm putting the children on the list because I've seen some previous David E. Kelley shows, and sometimes the kids could be involved. I go back to the scene where Kyle was throwing the baseball with his dad, and when he heard Carolyn's name be brought up, he seemed to be upset, which again makes me think maybe he found his dad having the affair. Maybe he didn't want his family to break up, so he took matters into his own hand. And last but not least, we have Tommy and Nico. Now, I'm leaning towards Nico being more involved than Tommy because I think of the line earlier in this episode when the reporter brought up the idea that Carolyn had her own political aspirations. Did Carolyn maybe have some dirt on Nico that can affect his campaign? Because I don't think it's a coincidence that she died just a mere weeks after he was elected the new district attorney. Now, before wrapping up, some main questions that came to mind for me is who else knows about this affair besides Barbara and the therapist? Speaking of that affair, how long was it going on between Rusty and Carolyn, and did it ever stop at one point? Which, speaking of Rusty, who's the father of this unborn child? Why did Carolyn hide her own child to Rusty, and what other secrets did she keep from him? Now, overall, as far as first episodes go, I thought it was an excellent episode to set up and establish the plot and the relationship between the characters and building the central idea of these lies and deceptions and keep your secrets from your loved ones. Taking a look at the main theme in this episode, which to me was the switch between power and control. You can look at Barbara staying with the family, having some sense of power over her situation, or Russ losing his job and losing control and power to Tommy, or Nico's campaign. Looking at Carolyn, not telling Rusty that she had a kid, or her ex-husband keeping this affair away from her. So again, this whole dynamic of escaping from your family, having second lives, and having the control and power over your own situation. So if you couldn't tell, I am a big fan of this show so far, and I've only seen the first episode, and I'm literally about to press play on episode 2. So by the time this video is out, episode 2 breakdown will be available. So make sure to leave your thoughts, theories, deeper meanings, clues that you all took away from this first episode in the comments below. And again, make sure to watch my second episode because this is a show I will be covering weekly because I am a big fan of murder mysteries and I look forward to solving this mystery with you all in the coming weeks. You all are great, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.